Late afternoon light filtered through thin clouds as Liang approached the well at the edge of his village. The creak of the bucket and the splash of water marked time in the rhythm of his day. A figure emerged from a nearby path as Xia, the widow who tended her small garden, now carrying a basket of fresh herbs. "Hello, Xia," Liang said, nodding as he began to draw up a bucket of cool water. Xia smiled, laying down her basket beside the well. "Hello, Liang." They worked in tandem, neither speaking much but understanding through subtle cues and shared rhythms. After a moment, Liang offered, "You seem thoughtful today." She looked up from filling her bottles with water, her eyes holding something more than usual. "I was thinking about our village," she said quietly. "Do you miss your husband?" Xia paused, setting down the full bottle gently. She met his gaze steadily. "Every day I remember what we had. But today, I thought more about what it means to live now without him." Liang handed her another bucket and they both fell quiet. The sound of water dripping into bottles was all around them. After a while, Liang said, "It's been 10 years since he passed." She nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her bottle. Then she looked at him, eyes bright with an unasked question. "You still remember things about him?" "Of course," Xia replied softly. "Like how his favorite flowers bloomed in spring." She paused, then added, "But now I notice more, the sound of cicadas in summer, the scent of rain." Liang filled another bucket and carried it to her garden for irrigation. The soil was rich, darkened by years of tending. "Do you ever wonder what he would think about the village now?" Liang asked as he poured water around young seedlings. Xia laughed softly, a sound that seemed almost surprised. "Maybe I'm here instead of him," she said. "I care for this place just like he did." They worked until it grew dark, only exchanging small gestures and nods. When the garden was tended to, Liang turned towards home while Xia stayed behind, looking back at the well. Just as he reached his own house, a breeze carried a faint scent of blooming flowers from her garden across the night air. It lingered in the quiet street like a soft whisper, a silent bond between them and all they left behind.
You're listening to the Empty Teahouse. The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again. The sky was a deep blue, streaked with faint pink lines of light as Li and his friend Wu waited on the fishing dock.
On the misty fishing dock at dawn, Li and his old friend Wu waited in silence. The sky was a deep blue streaked with faint pink lines of light. Fishermen began to appear, some towing boats with ropes through the damp sand, others walking with nets slung over shoulders. Li had come from the city, where he worked long days behind a desk. He visited Wu once a year when on leave. Wu lived simply in a small wooden house nearby, spending his life at sea and on this dock. They sat on a bench near the water's edge, legs dangling above the cold surface. Li handed Wu a thermos from his bag. "Thought you'd like some tea," he said. Wu took it slowly, then poured them both cups of hot liquid. Steam rose in tendrils as they sipped quietly. The fog settled thickly around their feet, muffling the usual early morning noise. After an hour or so, a few boats began to pull out into the gray waters. A small motor whirred softly in the distance. Li felt the damp chill and wrapped his coat tighter. Wu pointed out to sea where two gulls circled over waves like dancers. "Remember when we used to fish here together?" he asked without turning his head. Li nodded, looking at the boats pushing against the tide. He recalled their younger days, long nights on board, cold mornings like this one, returning with full nets and tired bodies. Now Wu fished only for himself. "Your son's doing well in town?" Wu asked. "Yes," Li replied, "but I see him less now." Wu set down his cup and looked at the water. "He has a new life there." Li's fingers tightened around his thermos. He thought of long workdays and emails piling up unanswered. His son had moved on without looking back. After a while, Wu leaned forward, peering into the fog as if it held some secret. "Sometimes I wonder why we hold on to things that are slipping away," he murmured. Li nodded again but didn't speak. He watched a lone boat drift further out to sea until only its white hull could be seen. Eventually, Wu stood up and stretched his back with a soft sigh. He offered Li the thermos as if it contained more than just tea. "Stay warm," Wu said. Li took one last sip of cool liquid and held Wu's gaze for a moment before he too rose. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing a distant skyline blurred by mist. They walked back to the path in silence, each step muffled under their feet. As they reached the house's gate, Li turned to say goodbye but found only an empty bench behind him. He closed his eyes for a moment and felt the chill on his face. A gentle sound, Wu's tea kettle bubbling inside, filled the quiet air as he walked away from the dock, leaving behind more than just misty mornings.
The kettle's whistle cut through the air, sharp and clear. At noon under an old tree's shade at the country market, Hannah sat quietly with her basket.
At the country market at noon, under an old tree's shade, Hannah sat with her basket of herbs and roots. Her stall was quiet, few customers in this heat. She looked around at the busy stalls selling vegetables, chickens, fish, everyday life bustling. A man approached slowly from the far end of the market. He had a small cage in his hand, which he set down next to Hannah's herbs when he reached her stand. It contained a single finch with fluttering wings but stillness in its eyes. "Finches," the man said softly, looking at Hannah as if she might answer back in kind. Hannah nodded without speaking. She had seen such cages before. Finches were popular for their songs. He didn't speak again right away, he simply watched her for a moment. Then he picked up his cage and moved on to another stall where children crowded around toys, their laughter carrying easily across the market square. Hannah continued to watch him move through the crowd. When he was halfway gone from sight, Hannah reached into her basket and pulled out 2 sprigs of lavender and handed them to a young woman walking by with an empty bag. "Please take these," Hannah said quietly, almost whispering it as she placed the sprigs in the woman's hand. The woman looked down at the purple blooms, then up at Hannah. "Are you sure?" Hannah smiled slightly and returned her gaze back to the market. There was a moment of quiet before the woman nodded and turned away with lavender in her palm. Later, after most of the sellers had packed their stalls, the finch seller appeared again next to Hannah's stall but without his cage. He stood there for several moments before he finally spoke, looking down at his feet instead of into her eyes. "Are you selling seeds?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "No," she replied softly, "but I have some." She reached back into her basket and found a small paper packet filled with wildflower seeds. She offered it to him without saying anything else. His fingers trembled slightly as he took them from her hand. He looked at the packet for what seemed like an eternity before slipping it inside his shirt pocket, turning away almost immediately after. Hannah watched until his back disappeared around a corner stall where several old men were sitting and talking about their days of farming gone by. She went to pack up her herbs but paused when she saw something small lying on the ground near her feet, an empty seed packet, half buried in dirt. It was a sign that someone else had also offered seeds to others today. She picked it up gently, holding it between her fingers as if it held some unseen message. The market closed its doors slowly, one by one, to the setting sun. Hannah stood for just a while longer at her empty stall before turning and walking home through the quiet streets of the village, lavender in her hair and seeds clutched tight in hand.
Somewhere in the distance, a finch's song caught the evening breeze. As dusk fell over the village tea house, 2 patrons were nearly alone inside.
At dusk, the village tea house was nearly empty. Outside, night's first whispers of cool crept in with the shadows, and inside, A single oil lamp flickered over two patrons seated at opposite ends of a long table. One was an old woman knitting by the window. Her hands moved steadily, like small birds finding their flight path through thickets. The other was a man who had entered just moments ago. His footsteps barely audible as he pulled out a chair and set down his basket. The old woman didn't look up at him initially, but she felt his presence. She continued knitting, her needles clicking softly in the stillness of the tea house. After a while, the man cleared his throat slightly, then spoke. "Can I join you for tea?" She smiled and nodded without interrupting her work. He poured himself a cup from the shared pot sitting between them. The steam rose slowly to meet his nose, carrying with it hints of jasmine and smoke. He took a sip, then another, letting each sip linger in his mouth before swallowing. The old woman's knitting needles clicked rhythmically as she worked on a red scarf that was half finished. Her eyes scanned her work for any loose threads or knots needing attention. After a few minutes, the man watched her hands carefully without seeming to stare. "Do you make scarves like this often?" he asked softly. She shook her head slightly and said, "Only when someone asks." He smiled thoughtfully but didn't ask more questions. Instead, he put his cup down gently and reached into his basket, pulling out a small wooden block carved with intricate designs. He set it next to the pot where anyone could see it. "I make these," he explained quietly. "Some call them ink stones for writing." The old woman looked at him then, her eyes crinkling around the edges as she smiled warmly. "Thank you," was all she said. He nodded back and picked up his cup again. They drank in silence, each sipping tea while the other worked or just sat watching. As darkness deepened outside, another customer came in and took a seat at their table. The new arrival murmured an apology to both of them as he set down a bowl full of steaming noodles for himself. No one said anything. It was simply understood that this was part of the rhythm of the tea house. The man's eyes moved from the window to the old woman, then back again. He saw how her hands slowed ever so slightly as she neared the end of her scarf. She tied off a final knot and laid down her knitting needles. "Will you take this?" he asked, holding out his hand with an ink stone inside it. She looked at him, puzzled for a moment before understanding dawned in her eyes. "Yes," she said quietly, "I will." He placed the stone on her palm gently, then stood up to leave, pausing only long enough to bow slightly towards her and the stranger sharing their table. As he moved away into the night, the old woman touched the stone thoughtfully before returning to her seat beside the window. Outside, the man walked through the foggy village streets quietly, feeling a lightness in his chest as if he had shed something heavy along with the scarf's red warmth.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again. A wooden bridge over a small stream in late autumn awaited them.
A wooden bridge over a small stream in late autumn. The leaves have turned and are falling softly around a woman and an orphan boy who carries 2 pails of water from one side to the other without spilling any. She is waiting for him on her knees, hands cupped beneath his buckets when he arrives. He lets go once she's ready, then steps back as if performing a choreographed dance. She pours out the cool water into 2 small teacups and sets them in front of each other, one to either side of the bridge stones where no grass grows yet. They sit there for some time before drinking their tea, watching the leaves twirl down around them like dancers at nightfall. The boy fidgets with his sleeves and asks if she's going to visit the village tomorrow. She smiles and says she will be selling salt along the river path but won't stay long, not after dark falls again. He nods solemnly, knowing better than anyone how fast that happens in late autumn. She tells him about finding a large carp swimming against the current upstream, its silver body shimmering like moonlight over water. The boy remembers last year when he caught one of those same fish and gave it to her for his birthday. She'd cooked it with ginger and vinegar for a special dinner under the bridge lights. "I still have that teapot," she says, holding up the spout as if offering him another cup of tea. "And I'll leave it on your windowsill when you come to fetch water early next week." He thanks her quietly, looking back towards his home where smoke rises from chimneys in the distance. She sees the weariness there and places a hand gently over his. "You're growing," she says, like it's something he can't see for himself yet but needs to hear anyway. "It happens every day without you noticing." He looks down at his feet and then up again, meeting her eyes. They are both silent after that, drinking their tea in the quiet of falling leaves. The sun dips lower and casts long shadows over the stream. She stands, tucks the teapot into her shoulder bag, and starts to walk away but stops when she sees him still sitting there. He watches her go without standing up or turning around once he notices she's left. The leaves continue their dance as if they know nothing of time passing or days becoming weeks. She reaches a hilltop where evening clouds gather low against the sky. From this vantage point, she can see his house and garden below, not much to look at but more than enough for what it means to him. She whispers something into the wind that carries her voice back down towards him and keeps going, knowing there's no need for more words now. Back on the bridge, the boy sets down his empty cups beside hers. He picks up a fallen leaf from between them, its colors blending like the hues of sunset still lingering behind trees. Holding it out in front of himself as if examining some secret object under the moonlight, he smiles and blows gently against its thin surface. The air is crisp, carrying whispers of cold winter nights ahead but also soft rustles of warmth remembered from autumn days spent together on this bridge where time seemed to slow just enough for two souls to find each other in quiet moments. He folds the leaf neatly into his pocket before turning back towards home, stepping lightly over stones that still feel warm from afternoon sun. She is already gone by then, leaving behind nothing but a faint trace of steam rising off the cold water as if it were her lingering presence or maybe just another fleeting moment caught in time's gentle embrace.
The last sliver of sunlight slipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the bridge. Shadows stretched and lengthened as night drew its curtain slowly. We close the door now. Until tomorrow.